So Oleksandr Usyk is fighting Daniel Dubois tonight at Wembley. It's a huge fight. This rematch could be spectacular. In one corner, you have Usyk, a modern great. In the other, Daniel Dubois, a new champion in fantastic form. The first fight had the controversial unofficial knockdown, and then there was the finish with the southpaw jab. But despite all this is a different Daniel Dubois. New confidence, improved boxing intelligence, and a different mindset. And there have been variables. An irritated Dubois, a menacing Usyk, a promoter leaving, media workout mind games, all culminating in a potentially great matchup. We're going into detail, the psychology, the gloves, the weight, and discussing the many variables to this fight.
Okay, so now let's move to video and let's talk about the various variables. Now, of course, we've spoken about some of them before in two previous videos. So now we're just going to kind of go over everything and then just lay it all out. So the last thing I saw, and I've got my phone with me, so I've got a few notes here. So the last thing I saw was the face-off. Now, face-offs, they can be a variety of things. They can be boring, they can be entertaining, they can be funny. Think of Tyson Fury, Klitschko. Their face-off, absolutely entertaining. Think of David Haye versus Klitschko. Again, extremely entertaining. And then you have face-offs that are not particularly entertaining, or there might be like an undercurrent where there might not be many words, but you can feel the tension, the anger. So face-offs, they can be a variety of things, and it depends on the characters and how the characters mesh, for want of a better word. Now, in a face-off, you have someone in the middle, and depending on what they say, well, I should put it this way. The person in the middle, the person who asks the questions, that person has a very important role, because their questions can dictate what happens in a face-off. So it can be the difference between a face-off being exciting or a face-off being boring. Now, of course, I believe a lot of fighters will come in with a pre-face-off strategy, but still, the person in the middle, they have an important role. Now, there was a question that was asked, and again, I got this on my phone, and it was posed to Usyk, and the question was, would you have got up? Would you have got up had the referee started counting? And of course, they're making reference to, I believe it was round 5, when Daniel Dubois threw a shot that was allegedly low, and the referee stopped counting and gave Usyk time to recover. So the question was, would you have gotten up if the referee had kept counting? And Usyk, his immediate answer was yes, he would have got up. I thought it was a good question. When he posed this question to Daniel Dubois, he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to talk about the first fight. He just wants to talk about, well, he didn't want to talk at all. So I thought that was interesting. And then there was another good question posed to Usyk. Now, Usyk is, a boxing great, a boxing legend. He's really done it all. Olympic gold medalist, undisputed champion, undisputed cruiserweight champion, undisputed heavyweight champion. He's definitely had a phenomenal career. So I thought, considering his resume, this question was a good question. Are you still hungry for boxing? And equally impressive was his response, which was, boxing is my oxygen. I'm paraphrasing. So when someone has accomplished so much, metaphorically speaking, they've got to the top of the mountain, I think it's a valid question to ask, are you still hungry? And are you still hungry for boxing? Now, I would say that Daniel Dubois was kind of calm. He was, just calm, didn't say much. He shut a lot of things down. He looked very serious. Usyk was quite playful, but there was an interesting dialogue when, again, there was a question posed to Usyk where the question was something along the lines of, was Daniel Dubois your hardest puncher? And Usyk's response was no. And then he said Derek Chisora was the hardest puncher he ever fought. Now, why would he say that? Well, clearly, I think there's a mind game there, because he's clearly trying to communicate the notion that Daniel Dubois doesn't punch that hard. And clearly, there is a lot of evidence that Daniel Dubois punches phenomenally hard. Most people will attest, whether it's trainers, previous opponents, that Daniel Dubois is a really hard puncher. So I guess here Usyk is trying to play some games here to suggest that no, he doesn't hit that hard. Why would he be doing that? Does he want Daniel Dubois to be more aggressive? Will that allow more counter opportunities? Perhaps will it mean that he'll burn up more nervous energy because he wants to prove his power? Will Daniel Dubois be questioning his power? I think this was definitely a trap laid by Usyk. And Usyk is one of the masters of the mind games. And when he fought Tyson Fury, these were like the kings. They were like both the king of the mind games. And we can argue that Usyk was triumphant on both occasions. So the next part is the media workout. And I guess one of the questions you could ask when it comes to a media workout is, are media workouts, do they reveal anything? Well, I guess yes and no. So the first thing you can see from a media workout, particularly if a fighter takes his top off, is, are they in shape? You can kind of look at them, and even though it's hard to determine shape by percentage of body fat, you can sometimes ascertain when someone is out of shape. A good example of this would be when Anthony Joshua fought Ruiz in the rematch. By looking at him, many people thought, yeah, Ruiz is not in shape. So media workouts can give some indications as to the mindset of the fighter. They can also, it's hard to look into the punch combinations, assuming that a fighter does any pad work, because now a lot of fighters won't do any pad work, but if they do, typically they're not going to do the punches that they're going to use for the fight, you would think anyway. So it's hard to look into those combinations and think, okay, he's going to try and hit me with those combinations. So, but you can definitely look into their speed, their power, how they look. Obviously in the lighter divisions, you could see, are they gaunt? Are they, do they look healthy? You can, I guess you can get a feel for their mannerisms, their psychology, etc. Now, there was one interesting thing that I noticed, and I'm pretty sure, we all know that Usyk is a southpaw. He's a southpaw fighter, but I'm pretty sure when he did his media workout, number one, he used what I call the sticks. They're not sticks, they're like foam sticks. So he was training, the trainer was holding up the foam sticks and he was punching them and avoided punches. But I'm pretty sure he went orthodox. And again, this is a mind game. Now, why would he go orthodox? Well, imagine you've done a 12-week camp training for a southpaw, and then you go into a media workout, and then your quote-unquote southpaw opponent is now fighting orthodox. That can put some doubts in your mind, because if you've been training with southpaw sparring partners and you haven't trained with any orthodox fighters, and why would you, then that can make you think, oh, maybe he's going to bring a certain look that I'm not prepared for. So I thought that was interesting. Daniel Dubois didn't do any work on the pads or anything. He just kind of moved around, but I thought he looked quite light, which I think is good, because like I said on another video, I think he should, the last 3 fights saw 3 sensational victories, but also revealed 3 different Daniel Dubois. We had the lighter Dubois with Joe Miller, then we had a heavier Dubois with Filip Hrgović, and then we had a heavier Dubois with Anthony Joshua. And I think between the Filip Hrgović and the Joe Miller weight, that's the type of weight that Daniel Dubois should be coming in. I think if he comes in as heavy as he came in for Anthony Joshua, or heavier, I think that could impact his foot speed and his punch speed. So the next thing is, I've spoke about the occasion. Obviously they're both used to big occasions. You would say that maybe Usyk has an advantage here, but remember, Daniel Dubois for Anthony Joshua, I believe it was at Wembley Stadium, and that was fully packed, and Daniel Dubois was so unaffected by the crowd. So I don't think the crowd or the occasion is going to have a negative impact on him. If anything, you could kind of say that the massive crowd and atmosphere made him perform more emphatically. So I don't think that this will be a significant factor. Now, this is something I've spoken about before, and I think this will be significant, especially for Daniel Dubois, and that's punch creativity. I think he needs to be creative, and I've spoken about a few things he could do. I've spoken about, maybe using the double right hand. I'm thinking if he wants to land the right hook or right uppercut to the body, he might need to set it up with either the left hook to the head or with the feint or with the jab. He definitely needs those deflections. So if you want to hit him to the body, you need to start with the head. And if you double up the right hand, but it needs to be short and it needs to be fast. Also, I think he might be able to do something with the double left hook, especially when Usyk is spinning out. I think the double left hook, that'll be a creative punch sequence that perhaps he could consider. And also, if you look at the two fights where Usyk had issues, which were Derek Chisora, the Tyson Fury first fight, and also the Anthony Joshua fights, you should look at what punches they used. Anthony Joshua had some success with the counter right hand, and I believe with the right hand lead. Tyson Fury had some great success with the right uppercut to the head and with the right hook to the body. But interestingly, Derek Chisora had some success when he went southpaw and utilized the southpaw jab. So I think Daniel Dubois needs that punch creativity, and he needs to incorporate those elements into his game. So if he could, have moments where he might shift southpaw, if he does do that, he needs to be mindful of the counters, but just to see if he could duplicate the success that Derek Chisora had, and also looking for that body shot, but setting up correctly, and then looking for that counter right hand. And against Anthony Joshua, Daniel Dubois showed a good counter right hand. He also showed a good counter right hand against Filip Hrgović. So these things are in his arsenal, and he really needs to pull them out. But he needs to set it up, and he needs to set it up effectively. And this is the whole thing when we talk about boxing intelligence, utilizing his boxing intelligence. Okay, so the other thing, this hasn't been discussed anywhere, but the gloves. I think the gloves are important. If I was in Usyk's camp, I would want heavier gloves to lessen the punch power of Daniel Dubois. Definitely. Interestingly, and I've made this reference before, when Evander Holyfield fought Lennox Lewis in the first fight, Lennox Lewis wanted the softer gloves, the puncher's gloves, and Evander wanted the padded gloves. And I feel if I was Daniel Dubois, I would want the puncher's gloves, because I think that would be really important psychologically and literally, because you really, really want to maximize your power here. And of course, with the padded gloves, there's pros and cons. That will lessen the power, but it will also lessen the speed of Usyk's punches. But I definitely think the pros override the cons. Now, I've seen some footage of Daniel Dubois training. So I've seen him hitting pads. Unsurprisingly, he's looking sharp. He's looking fast. I actually like the pad work that I saw, because the pad guy was actually throwing punches back. And I feel that when pad work, you throw punches back, it's simulating. It's not purely simulating a fight, but it's simulating something similar to a fight than if punches weren't coming back. So I thought that was good. And he looked very sharp, looked very focused, as you would expect. Obviously, these clips are edited, but it did look promising. He was throwing the left hook, throwing a sharp jab, and a lot of people say that Daniel Dubois has a very good jab, and I think the battle of the jabs will be important. I don't know if Daniel Dubois can win the battle of the jabs, but it's important that he competes in the battle of the jabs. So I guess the other elements here is, and this is a question I was just thinking before I came on here, who is more motivated? And I think if you look at it objectively, when you think about what they've accomplished, and don't get me wrong, Daniel Dubois has accomplished a lot. He's a heavyweight champion. But Usyk is gold medalist, undisputed cruiserweight champion, undisputed heavyweight champion. If you look at it objectively, Daniel Dubois will clearly be the more motivated of the two. And that could be significant. He will be very, very motivated. And not only will he be motivated to beat Usyk, he'll be motivated to get his revenge. He will desperately want to get his revenge. And here's another question that I thought was important. Who will be more confident? And that's actually a hard question to answer. Because on one hand, you could say, well, Usyk will be more confident because he won the first fight. He won it by knockout with a jab. But on the other hand, Daniel Dubois will be more confident because even though it was an unofficial knockdown, he still put his man on the floor. So he has some evidence that his power can have a significant impact specifically on Usyk. And that psychologically is important. Also, there's another factor. Usyk was a legendary fighter when he fought Daniel Dubois. But Daniel Dubois has progressed immensely since that last fight. So if Usyk was operating on 100%, you might be able to say that Daniel Dubois was like at 70, 75%, and he's added an extra 20% to his game. And another factor, I believe, is significant, and I've spoken about this in the other videos, is the boxing intelligence or the boxing IQ. And I think this will be the most significant factor. And Daniel Dubois in his last 3 fights has shown that he can solve puzzles. He solved the puzzle of Jarrell Miller. Jarrell Miller was big. He stalked you and he threw hard punches. They were short punches, but they were hard, and he just kept coming. And he would just absorb everything you took. He overcame that puzzle. That was a hard puzzle to overcome, because Jarrell Miller's a very confident fighter. He'll take your heart. Filip Hrgović, another really confident fighter, who had a great jab, a great 1-2. He overcame that puzzle. And he overcame the puzzle of Anthony Joshua, who was a 2-time heavyweight champion. And you could argue was in good form. His previous fight, he looked absolutely sensational. So he came into that fight very, very confident. So they were 3 puzzles, 3 difficult puzzles that he solved. And previously before that, he failed in the puzzle, the Joy Joyce puzzle, which was interesting because effectively it was the jab that broke him down. And I think this fight will be determined perhaps not just on Daniel Dubois' power, but on how well he can solve the Usyk puzzle. Can he solve the Usyk puzzle with his increased boxing intelligence? We all know that Usyk, he solves puzzles all the time. He's developed a training regime that is based on developing his cognitive abilities and his intellectual abilities. So his training isn't just about the physicality, it isn't just about the sparring, it isn't just about doing the speedball, it isn't just about hitting the bag, it's also about improving your intellect, your boxing intellect, and solving those puzzles. And I think this will be significant. There's another bit I want to talk about as well, and that's about punching at the target or through the target. So this is a simplified way of punching. In boxing, you can punch at the target or through the target, and both can have different results. I would say primarily Muhammad Ali would punch at the target. He'd punch at the target and move. I would say Bivol, for the most part, punches at the target. I would say Thomas Hearns mostly punches through the target. Now, when you punch through the target, it increases the chances for a knockout, but it also increases the chances to be counterpunched. So, for example, Lennox Lewis, that's another puncher who varies it. He punches at the target, but sometimes he punches through the target. And I believe it was stated that when Lennox Lewis fought Evander Holyfield, he punched at the target as opposed to through the target, primarily because he knew that Evander Holyfield was such a good counter-puncher that if he tried to punch through the target too many times, he would get counter-punched. So this is an important part of boxing intelligence, to know when to punch at the target and to know when to punch through the target. And Daniel Dubois has shown both. Gerald Miller, he was primarily punching at the target until the last round. Against Filip Hrgović, he was punching through the target. Anthony Joshua, you saw when he landed that big right hand, that was punching through the target. I would say Usyk primarily punches at the target. If you look at the Derek Chisora fights, he's primarily punching at the target. The Tyson Fury fights, he was mixing it, but mostly punching through the target. So again, he can mix it. And I think this will be interesting, because I think in this fight, Usyk will punch at the target, but I think Daniel Dubois may try and punch through the target, and if he does do that, that will increase his ability for a knockout, but it will also increase the punching counter opportunities for Usyk. So for me, I think, look, the first question is, can Daniel Dubois win this fight? Of course he can. With his increased boxing intelligence, his speed and his power, if he has the right strategy, and if he comes in like I think he can come in, he can definitely win this fight. And he could win it in sensational style. But to me at the moment, and this is before seeing the weigh-in, I think at the moment, the thing that stands out between the two is the boxing intelligence. And Daniel Dubois' boxing intelligence has gone up, and I think we have to definitely give Don Charles some credit for nurturing Daniel Dubois' boxing IQ and boxing intelligence. But I still think that this is the significant difference. And obviously there's a few scenarios here. There's obviously the one-punch knockout. You would think Daniel Dubois is more likely to be able to do that. However, if Daniel Dubois is unable to land his punches, if he's unable to solve the puzzle, then I'm not sure if Usyk will knock him out, but it will become increasingly difficult for him to find any momentum and to be able to be successful. However, that being said, this is a great fight, and there is some great potential, and hopefully the fight will live up to all the expectations.